Joining me now on the Boardwalk Honda hotline to talk all about it, Marcus Hayes of the Philadelphia Daily News. Marcus, how you doing on this wet and rainy Saturday?
Pretty good, Josh. How are you?
I'm doing well. So I first want to touch on the Sixers with you because they're obviously in the full swing of the offseason. And when you think about it, you have with the Sixers one of those deals where the offseason, when you see how some of these teams go in, it's every year's a little different, right? It's, depending on what happened the year before. And this year, it's very different what's happened in the past because you finally make the playoffs after 6 years. So what are some of your thoughts on what this team is doing moving forward now with the 10th pick and with all this salary cap room?
Well, I guess the question is, what do I think they should do? If it were me and I was trying to win championships and create a stable base for the next, probably 4 to 5 years, I guess, I probably wouldn't go after LeBron. I wouldn't criticize them for doing it, but I don't think they're close enough to beating the Warriors or the Rockets or the Celtics to even add a LeBron. I think they're farther away than that, regardless of sort of whoever else they add, assuming they're not adding, also adding a Kawhi Leonard or Kawhi Leonard or a Paul George. So, a Paul George would make more sense. I think a Kawhi Leonard would cost you either Ben Simmons or Joel Embiid. So all that said, I would pursue someone of the Paul George ilk, who he's not LeBron, he's not Paul George anymore, but he's a very solid player who provides a key cog, a key fit, and can do the things that you need to have done. He's a pretty good defender. He's a decent three-point shooter. He's a good finisher. He does a lot of things well. So that would be my next step. But the real issue for the Sixers, I don't think they can win a championship within the next 2 or 3 years, regardless of who they add. I think they win a championship when Markelle Fultz and Joel Embiid and Ben Simmons have matured. And they're probably 2 seasons from that. So the urgency that Brett Brown speaks with, I think, is understandable, but probably misplaced, because it's clear to me that he thinks LeBron James makes this a championship caliber team, or at least gets them to the finals.
Marcus, you mentioned about the fact of a guy that can take them to the finals. How many years do you think Embiid and Simmons are away? Because this is the first full season we've seen both of them healthy on the court together.
I think they're 2 seasons away, and so is Dario Saric. So it's really hard to develop in the NBA after not playing much basketball, and none of them have played much basketball past high school, and Joel Embiid hasn't played a lot of basketball in his life. So, Dario is probably the guy who's played the most, but he's the least talented among them. Dario Saric is. And, Ben Simmons missed the season, Joel Embiid missed 2.5, and Markelle Fultz just missed the season. So they're probably a good 2 years away from contending for a title, which is great. I mean, that speaks to their incredible abilities, because they probably should be more than 2 years away, with one guy having played, with 2 guys having played 1 full season and one guy having played 0 full seasons. To say that they're 2 years away from contending for a title is a gigantic compliment to their athletic ability and the skills that they already possess.
Do you believe that Brett Brown at this point is the right coach for this team? Because that's been a controversial conversation point among a lot of people, because a lot of people, including myself, feel like that Brad Stevens outcoached him throughout the Celtics series, and this is really the first time Brett Brown had a full team altogether. Do you think he's the long-term coach for this team?
Well, this is also the first time Brett Brown has coached the head coach in the playoffs. And Brad Stevens is a superior coach. I mean, he's probably one of the 2 or 3 best coaches in the league, as evidenced not only by what he did with Brett Brown in the playoffs, but also, what he did in the first round of the playoffs, and the fact that he lost his 2 All-Stars, one guy who's probably going to be in the Hall of Fame, and Kyrie Irving, as well as Gordon Hayward, and, managed to put a very good team together. And, Danny Ainge gets a lot of credit for that as well. It's not like Brad Stevens is using non-players. He's using actual NBA players who've been developed and understand their roles and fit into a system. But yeah, to question Brett Brown's fitness at this point seems kind of foolish. I mean, this is the first year he's had a full team, every single player of which he created except J.J. Redick, and he put J.J. Redick in a position J.J. Redick's never been in before, and J.J. Redick responded. I mean, he created Joel Embiid. He created Ben Simmons. He created Dario Saric. He created Robert Covington. He created T.J. McConnell, and he had them win 52 games in a playoff series. To posit that he's not the right guy because he was outcoached by Brad Stevens, who has Al Horford and Marcus Morris and Marcus Smart and, some good players on his team, some very good players on his team, as well as Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, who were two guys who were drafted and given the chance. One guy's had 2 seasons to develop as a secondary player, and another guy's had a full season to develop as a secondary player. I mean, these guys aren't dogs. They're not bad players. They're excellent players. So to posit that he's not the right guy because he was outcoached by a coach who had, I would argue, he had a better roster after Joel Embiid all the way down through the next. I would argue that right now, all 5 of the Boston starters, or at least 4 of the Boston starters, are better all-around basketball players than Ben Simmons. So after Embiid, to Simmons, he had the next 4, the 4 next best guys, or at least maybe the next 3. So there wasn't a mismatch in coaching any more than there was a mismatch in talent. I think it's kind of equal. They had the better team. They clearly had the better team. These guys aren't bad players. Jason Tatum might be the best rookie right now, the best overall rookie right now, excuse me, including Ben Simmons. And Jaylen Brown might turn out to be a better player than Ben Simmons. We don't know. He's awful right now. He's better than Jason Tatum. So it's not as though Brett Brown was beaten by Brad Stevens and just a bunch of guys. He was beaten by Brad Stevens, who had home court and some pretty good players, including, probably the most complete player in the tournament, in the series, and Al Horford. He's a very, very good player. He's an all-star. So all that said, if you want to question Brett Brown's fitness off that series, go ahead. But understand, he's a guy who was in his first season as a playoff coach and won a series with a bunch of guys who won, somewhere between 10 and 20 games more than they were supposed to win. It seems a pretty harsh judgment for a guy the first time through who had so much success getting there.
Marcus Hayes of the Philadelphia Daily News joining us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline here on 97.3 ESPN. Do you think if the Sixers were to acquire a Kawhi Leonard because of Brett Brown's connection to the Spurs, do you think that Brown would be the perfect guy to not just coach that type of unit, but also considering that he was part of Kawhi's development and the development that he has done with his team, it seems like he would be an ideal guy to really make all of that work?
Well, it's interesting when we talk about Brown being the ideal guy because you're not giving any other alternatives. You're not saying Brett Brown or someone else. I mean, on the surface, yes, Brett Brown knows who Kawhi Leonard is and maybe what Kawhi Leonard can do and has connections that certainly has deep connections as to what's transpired over the last couple of years with Kawhi Leonard and where he is physically and mentally. But, we don't know what the alternatives are to Brett Brown. It's kind of like when we have the conversations about, well, we should trade this guy. Well, who are you going to trade him for? And who are you going to trade with? And what are you going to give up? We're talking about trading for Kawhi Leonard. Unless the Spurs believe that he's totally injured or totally disenfranchised with them, they're not going to give him up for anything less than Ben Simmons or Joel Embiid, because he's a top 3 player in the league when he's healthy and he's committed. And there's no, anything else would be kind of a fantasy. If you can project that anything else would net you a top 5 to 10 player in the league, whether it's Markelle Fultz or Markelle Fultz on a pick or Markelle Fultz and Dario on a pick, players make the difference in this league. Kawhi Leonard is the gold standard right now when he's healthy. So I don't understand. It's great to posit. We could get Kawhi Leonard at 20. I believe he's 25 or 27 here in Philadelphia for the next few years. That would be wonderful. but you would change the template because one of the two foundational guys would be gone.
Marcus, one more question on the Sixers when we move over to the Phillies. What would you do with the 10th overall pick? Would you keep the pick and make a selection, or would you consider trading that to help upgrade the roster?
Well, it depends on what you're trading it for. I don't know that there's only so many minutes. If you believe that Dario Saric and Markelle Fultz are not an answer for this team, and you want to get another entity in here who maybe will help the team, and he's higher than number 10, or he's a guy you want to trade for who's a veteran, that's fine. But it's interesting to me that so many people want to abandon, quote unquote, the process 12 months after testifying that the process was essentially complete and we had all these wonderful players. We don't know if Markelle Fultz is a bust or not. If you think he is, okay, trade the pick. But there's only one basketball. There's only so many guys who can shoot it. And, that was an issue during the regular season and in the playoffs this year because you didn't have enough. You had a choice to not play Markelle Fultz, and you had a choice to not play, Amir Johnson. You had a choice to not play Justin Anderson. Those guys will be replaced by other assets, and you're going to have to not play them. You didn't play Timothy Luwawu-Cabarrot at times last year in this because there just weren't enough minutes for him. Jared Bayless was paid, $6-8 million this year to not play because there's only one basketball. So if you're willing to abandon one or two of the assets, then you can trade the pick. But the impatience and the unwillingness to watch people develop, I'm flabbergasted that people are so critical of Ben Simmons not being able to shoot or Joel Embiid not being in shape. That's expected from young players. They have to learn how to be professionals. Markelle Fultz has to learn how to be a professional. These are real things that these kids have to learn. And this is part of the process. And the process was delayed 3 to 4 years by bad picks and injury. It's a long process. And to abandon it now, the people who said be patient, suddenly aren't very patient any longer. Just because they won 50 games in a playoff series against probably an overrated and overmatched Miami Heat team, a team that I thought was going to do better. But, nobody really predicted what was going to happen in the first round happening the way it did. So, no, I would like to see these guys develop under a guy who's proven that he can develop players amazing. If Brett Brown were to be let go tomorrow, he'd be the number one coach. He'd be the number one sought-after coach in the NBA by far because everybody's rebuilding, and doing what he did once he had healthy players makes him the absolute number one overall draft pick when it comes to developing teams. Lloyd Pierce just got a job in Atlanta because he was with Brett Brown. It's just that simple. You don't think Atlanta would rather have Brett Brown than Lloyd Pierce?
Absolutely. If I could just follow up on what you said about Ben Simmons, I hear the same thing that you mentioned. Everyone keeps complaining about his shooting, but why do people are so readily to jump on him to forget about the fact that the young man plays defense? He is a great passer. He can handle the ball. He can drive to the basket. He is a well-rounded basketball player outside of the shooting aspect. And when, for example, when Jason Kidd came in the league, he couldn't hit the side of the barn half the time. It's not like Magic Johnson had a great jump shot his first time in the league. LeBron wasn't hitting threes when he first came in. Guys can develop, and I think that people are a little bit too quick to criticize Ben when they forget about the other aspects of his game.
It's funny. I used those exact examples when Michael Carter-Williams shot poorly when he got to Philadelphia, and when he was traded, people were, he can't play because he can't shoot. Michael Carter-Williams had every opportunity to become a proficient shooter, the same as Magic, the same as Jason Kidd. I did all the numbers on. I think John Stockton might have been one of those guys too. So, you're right. When you get to the NBA, you are not developed. Usually by the time you sign your first contract, the reason contracts are 4 to 5 years or 3 to 4 years or whatever they are for high first-round picks is because you want to have the capacity to develop guys who are one-and-dones or overseas guys who need to develop. That's what young guys do, and that's what good teams do with young guys. The reason we love Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown so much right now is because they were given the chance not only to develop, but to develop the second and third options.
Marcus Hayes joining us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline on 97.3 ESPN. Make the switch over to the Phillies. I think a lot of people would be surprised about how well this Phillies team has played. And to me, one of the highlights has been the pitching. You see what Aaron Nola has done. You saw Nick Pivetta have the 11 strikeouts versus the Orioles. And to me, for this team to keep moving forward, the key is going to be the pitching, because it's not going to be every night you're going to be able to get the offense to explode. Yeah, Santana and Franco are among the top 15 in the National League in RBI, but where the pitching goes, I think this team will go. What do you think, Marcus?
Yes and no. I mean, yes, I believe that the most important, I guess, issue with the Phillies and any team that really plays in a ballpark. I hate to rip off Citizens Bank Park as much as I do, but anybody that plays in a ballpark like that, yeah, you really need good, solid pitching and committed pitching and durable pitching. And we can't know if we have that yet. And that's the issue with this staff. It's that none of them had started more than 27 games in a season before this year, except Jake Arrieta, if I'm not mistaken. So we don't know where they're going to go or what they're going to be, but they are by far maybe the biggest surprise in baseball, but certainly the biggest surprise on this roster. It's just it's been very just astounding, especially with sort of the unknown entity that was their manager and coaches. You know what I mean? Usually you expect a pitching staff to sort of settle down once they understand what's going on. And I'm not sure we still know what's going on, especially with the bullpen, which often affects how your starters perform. They put too much pressure on themselves. But the dependability and the consistency from this starting pitching has been it's really been fun to watch. It's really been fascinating.
We were talking about earlier in the show what the Phillies should do if they're still in contention at the trade deadline. And one of the things I brought up was I would like to see them acquire another arm for the bullpen and a left-handed starting pitcher if they're still in contention. Do you think that they should target to improve the pitching or the hitting if they're still in contention at the trade deadline?
Well, it kind of depends on what happens. If Rhys Hoskins and Aaron Altair are doing what they're supposed to do at the All-Star break, then I don't know that you want to upset that offense. I don't know that you want to, because to me, adding pitching at the break, or at the All-Star break, but at the deadline, adding pitching always returns you more. You know what I mean? Those guys come in and you can sort of manipulate them a little bit more and maybe get a little bit more out of them. I'd love to see Cole Hamels return. I think that would be a brilliant sort of cherry on top for this franchise. But I'm not sure about the bullpen. I want to see this bullpen develop a little bit more. They've got some big arms in the bullpen, and they've got some talent in the bullpen, and it needs to be sort of curated. And I think it gets curated better if it has defined roles, which this analytics-based management team is never going to, I think, commit to. You know what I'm saying? So you might be right. They might need somebody. The bullpen, I think, would look a lot better if Pat Neshek was in it. And his injury and Tommy Hunter's injury, the fact that the bullpen is decent without them and has been decent without them is almost as astounding as how good the starting pitching has been. I mean, the Philly starters have a 3.4 ERA in 42 starts. And 25-17. That's third best in the National League after Washington, who's number one, which you expect, in St. Louis, who you might expect. But nobody put the Phillies third as a starting rotation. It's been a revelation and a real credit to building it and to managing it and coaching it. It's really been fun to watch. The bullpen isn't terrible. It's got it's probably the fifth or sixth or seventh best bullpen in the National League, but you can't have everything, right?
No, you can't have everything. Marcus, one more before I let you go, and I always appreciate the time on a Saturday here on 97.3 ESPN. Odubel Herrera reaching base now 44 straight games. He's really approaching some pretty big names, guys like Chuck Klein, Mike Schmidt, and of course, who can forget Bobby Abreu for his exploits in Philadelphia. I never thought I would see Bobby Abreu on a list like that, but Odubel Herrera, put into context a little bit what you're seeing from him this year, because he's getting on base, he's got a high batting average, he's having the best year of his career so far.
Well, we're talking about letting guys mature, guys with talent, letting them mature, and to me, he's a perfect case. He's a perfect case study. I mean, one of the interesting things that I find about Gabe Kapler, the Phillies manager, who seemed to be eccentric, is that he doesn't mind eccentrics. If he believes that that you're working hard and you're doing what you can do to help the team, you can act and look however you want. He doesn't care. He doesn't care what you eat. He doesn't care how you sleep. He doesn't care. If he thinks that you're doing the best that you can, that you're doing what he asks of you, he doesn't care if you flip bats. He doesn't care if you run backwards on the bases. He wants you to play disciplined baseball. But, Odubel Herrera, I think the best way to get to Odubel Herrera is to let Odubel Herrera do what he needs to do. And, I was there for the Bobby Abreu and Jimmy Rollins years when people criticized both of them for how they acted and did they play hard and all those sorts. Bobby Abreu was by far the best player on the team for about a 4-year stretch. It wasn't close. And the way that this city and the team, especially the manager, treated him was despicable. He was a professional player. He showed up all the time and he produced. And he played every game. So did Jimmy, So Odubel Herrera, while he does lots of knuckleheaded things and seems to be doing fewer, if you let him flourish, if you leave him alone, I believe that's the best way to get the most out of him, is to just sort of leave him alone instead of let him govern himself, because he's a pretty good kid. I know he's not this is his 4th year and he's 26. He's not a child, but he's a pretty good guy. His teammates like him. He wants to do the right thing. He wants to play hard, and he wants to win. And because he looks different and acts different, that shouldn't necessarily be a penalty for him. Just because he's not like you or not like me doesn't mean that he should be penalized for that. Baseball's the toughest grind in sports. It's 162 games. It's 6, 7, 8 months, depending on how you want to parse it, with spring training and the postseason, and making guys comfortable, managing guys is an art form. Charlie Manuel was wonderful at it. He was a great manager. You can talk about his baseball acumen all you want, but he was a great manager of men. And that's why he was so successful with the, kind of weird club. I mean, you put Shane Victorino and Jimmy Rollins and Chase Utley and Jason Worth and Cole Hamels in a clubhouse, those are pretty disparate personalities, and he made those work. Gabe Kapler's has a good start to making another group of disparate personalities work well together.
Follow him on Twitter at InkStainedWretch. That's Marcus Hayes of the Philadelphia Daily News joining us today on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Marcus, always appreciate the insights and the perspective as always, and I hope you stay dry in this wet weekend.
Thanks, Charles. I'll talk to you later, man.